We are back, and we are joined on the phone lines by Ettingermentum of the eponymous Ettingermentum newsletter. And you can find that over on Substack, Ettingermentum newsletter. Thanks so much for coming on. What should I just, can I shorten it? Or?
No, you can just call me Josh. Everybody just calls me Josh whenever I come on the shows like this.
Oh, okay. All right, Josh. Well, Josh of the Ettingermentum newsletter, you wrote this piece back in March that I've been wanting to have you on to discuss for a while now, the modern electoral history of transphobia. Thanks so much for coming on. I cite it all of the time when I hear from liberals about how being strong on trans issues, protecting trans people, is somehow a liability at the ballot box.
Yeah, that's like, it was really strange doing the research with this and even like kind of thinking about it beforehand, because that was such a strong myth. People would just say out of hand, like, oh, all these woke policies, like bathrooms, like that's what's killing Democrats. But like, if you just looked at a very cursory history of the times that this has been a major electoral issue, it's been terrible for Republicans. It's not just in blue states. Like my approach for it is I went from like 2015 basically to the present day, starting in North Carolina and to the 2022 midterms. And I wanted to give kind of a balanced kind of like story, like, oh, this is where it's worked, this is where it hasn't. But when I was doing research, I couldn't find a single example of where it was successful. All of the times where they've attempted these, like making transphobia a major issue of political campaigns, it has basically ended in failure. And I thought that, like, just putting that like in a timeline could be an effective way of kind of definitively showing that this is not really the issue people think it is politically.
Well, let's go through that timeline then, and talk a bit about those early losses and when the issue of trans people started cropping up within the right-wing legislative movement. North Carolina's bathroom bill is the time, I would say, that the right planted their flag on this issue and tried to make it a thing. And this was a bit of a ramp up period because this bathroom bill at the time, I remember it was condemned and CEOs started to say we're not going to do business in North Carolina and things like that, which sounds probably a bit foreign to people now, given how widely spread these state legislature-driven trans-affirming care bills and drag bans, how I would say widespread they are. But just take us back to that time period in North Carolina and the context of how that started.
Yeah, so, well, like they've been pushing bathroom bills specifically starting around the early, like, 2010s and 2013. 2013. It was this organization called the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a very like influential Christian conservative and like classified as a hate group by I think the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they created model legislation for these bathroom bills, and they hadn't actually been passed anywhere. But what was going on in North Carolina is that Republicans there had tremendous levels of legislative control. They had super majorities, they had the governorship. And they were considered by national movement conservatives as a laboratory state to pass these sorts of like the most far right policies to see basically what they would do to test them out. There were other states like this, like Wisconsin with anti-labor legislation and Kansas with tax cut legislation were also seen as laboratories. But North Carolina was sort of the electoral and social issues laboratory for them. It was one of the first places they passed voter ID laws. So you can't separate this push from the other like parts of the right-wing project. And the first move was made by the Charlotte City Council, basically. You can like, this is all like inside of the story. I'm just kind of looking back at it, where they passed a bill that would like kind of establish prohibiting discrimination on gender identity in their public accommodations. And the government there in North Carolina freaked out about this. They passed a bill that took total local control out of how like local municipalities could handle this. And they also outlawed like changes in the minimum wage. It was just a kind of a power grab. And like you said, it created a huge backlash. It was considered a very new thing. It was a totally new issue. Nobody understood why like they were going so hard on it. And with businesses, they understood it basically as, well, the state is mandating discrimination. We can't like really advertise ourselves as being in the state if we're abiding by these policies. And it cost the state $4 billion. And that's a low estimate. It was a massive economic hit. And that was how the first kind of battle of this was colored, where it was seen as sort of an economic issue. And but even that kind of clouds what the right was trying to do here, where their mindset was, they'll try to make this an economic issue, but we're so like on the public opinion, we're so right on that we're just going to win either way. And that didn't work. And they lost the North Carolina governorship to admittedly a very strong and popular candidate, Roy Cooper, who campaigned largely on this issue, even as Trump won the state. So there was like 50,000 to maybe 100,000 Trump voters in North Carolina who voted for a Democrat in that election over this issue. So
this was 2016, right, Josh? I mean,
so 2016.
Democrats did not do well almost, anywhere.
No.
Except for in this situation and the explicit context of, Roy Cooper running, rejecting the transphobia versus his opponent, McCrory.
Yeah, and this is like a really amazing fact. McCrory was the sole incumbent Republican in the entire country to lose in a state that Trump won.
Wow.
There was not a single other Republican running in a Trump state that lost in 2016 besides him.
And I mean, so that you can see, and you can't draw a causal connection there, obviously, but one of the data points is that voters were not moved enough by transphobia to re-elect McCrory, they instead...
They were moved in the other direction.
Yeah.
And McCrory was very popular. He won by 12 points in his first election. He won the city of Charlotte. He was considered a moderate, pro-business Republican. He was the mayor of Charlotte, actually, which is kind of unimaginable now. And his reputation got destroyed by this, and it's caused him to lose a race he absolutely should have won. Incumbent governors rarely lose. They especially don't lose when the president is carrying their state in a presidential year. We haven't really seen a result like it since. And Cooper has remained very popular. Like, he won re-election even as Trump won the state in 2020. So it's not just he's a strong candidate, but he never could have won if it weren't for them making that stance. And that was how the issue got introduced really to the country and to the Republican Party. And it really clouded their perceptions of it for the next couple of years during Trump's tenure.
Yeah, and you can so then that's how this issue was introduced. It was a failure for at least the governor, the election for the governorship in North Carolina in terms of the Republicans' point of view here. But people then will say, okay, this was before there really was a national narrative about trans people. Trump had just gotten elected. They were beginning to talk about trans people in a derogatory manner, but there was not the just tidal wave of transphobia that we saw in 2022. Let's talk, though, about that period in the early Trump administration when there were also losses with transphobia being on the ballot.
Yeah, there was some stuff here with Roy Moore in Alabama and the 2017 gubernatorial races in New Jersey and Virginia. But the one that I really think is important here is because this was explicitly recognized as a turning point by the anti-trans PACs, like this one group I found everywhere, the American Principles Project, which is a really funny group. They were founded to advocate for a return to the gold standard, and they really got obsessed with trans stuff about 5 years ago. But in 2019 there was another governor's race, in this time in Kentucky, where a Republican governor there, Matt Bevin, was incredibly unpopular. He had he had major clashes with the teachers in his state. It's traditionally more Democratic down ballot, so he was considered vulnerable. The Democrats there nominated the sitting attorney general, this Andy Beshear, who is the son of a very popular former governor of the state. So he was a strong candidate, sort of similarly to Cooper. And it was considered to be a race Republicans had a real shot of losing, even though it was in Kentucky, because the incumbent was just that unpopular. And what they did here, and you can read articles from before the race, they explicitly used this election as a place to test out a new kind of transphobia as a wedge issue. And it's not just conjecture here. The groups here were explicitly saying, yes, The bathroom stuff didn't work. People aren't moved by that. They think we're weird for even bringing it up. But when we talk about boys and girls sports, that is our new angle. We're going to run these ads and do this, and we have proof that it changes things. So they explicitly laid down the gauntlet in this race in Kentucky, and this was a race Republicans were leading in the polls in by the time of the election, and they said this was going to change the race by 4 to 7 points, which is a massive swing.
Right.
Like Biden won in 2020 by only 4 points. If like that could have swung the entire election to Trump if this was really that effective, and it failed. Bevin lost as an incumbent. Beshear beat him, and this like campaign, like first it failed in North Carolina, which it's going to say, granted, that's a relatively moderate purple state, but Kentucky is like one of the reddest states in the country.
Voted for Trump by 30 points. Voted for Trump by 30 points.
If there's any place on the planet where right-wing wedge issues should be effective, it would be there. And like I kind of am planning on following this up because Beshear looks he's on the ballot next month because Kentucky has election years the year before presidential races. And they're doing the same exact strategy again. And a poll recently showed Beshear up by 16 points. So it didn't work then, and it's not working now. And that was a really weird moment for these kinds of groups because they explicitly laid down this as their test case, and it totally just did not work.
Yeah, and I mean,
and it wasn't even a business angle here. It was just purely culture.
Exactly, and then the national narrative is beginning to ramp up. People are becoming more aware of trans people in general. The other examples you cite in this period, the Roy Moore loss in Alabama, but I think you can't draw more conclusion from that. I would say, given the fact that he was accused credibly of basically being a pedophile, and then
it didn't save it from that. The transphobia didn't save the pedophilia accusations.
Yes, right, and then in New Jersey and Virginia there were two governorship losses for Republicans. A Democrat was elected in New Jersey, Phil Murphy, and then in Virginia as well. But those were
guy, Ralph Northam.
Right, but those their opponents kind of shied away from transphobia, so it's a data point, but it's not necessarily, I would say, the example that wins the day here, which is the Andy Beshear case. And then we get to 2020 and 2022, and I would say where your piece go ahead.
If you don't mind, if I could go back to the 2017 races. One thing that I found that was very interesting in those were races where Republicans did moderate on the issue a little more, and you could say they lost both races by pretty big margins. It didn't make an impact, but they actually won between the two states, 3 congressional districts that voted for Democrats in 2018. So the moderation of those issues you could have said, helped them a little bit. And I calculated it that like if those districts had voted for Republicans the next year, they could have very well won the House in 2020. But they didn't because there were 3 incumbents in all of those across those 3 states that all won their re-elections, I believe.
Yeah, I mean it makes sense. And then just to jump forward here, because I do want to kind of get your general thoughts on the topic after we lay out all of these examples. 2022 is the year where all the transphobes lost. But I guess we can start with 2020 and then move to more current times.
Yeah. Well, 2020 was a very awkward year for them because they had failed on basically everything. And Trump was doing this kind of interesting strategy where he was trying to appeal to Clinton voters, which actually to an extent did work. If you look at states like Florida, he did increase his numbers with some traditionally Democratic demographics, but he lost enough support among white voters that he lost the election. I think there's kind of a funny statistic that the only group in the entire country that voted for Trump by less or swung against him in terms of vote share in 2020 was white men, which is like, it really goes against a lot of liberal narratives about how that election turned out and is something I try to point out a lot. But part of what they were doing with that is that they tried to advertise Trump as pro-gay. They sold Pride MAGA stuff. They had like rainbow MAGA hats. They called him the most pro-gay president in history. They had his gay national security advisor give a speech at the RNC. They had these rallies called Trump Pride, where it was basically just anti-immigrant stuff, saying the immigrants hated gay people. So there wasn't much of an interest in this kind of culture warring during that election. and that kind of gave transphobes a bit of a time to regroup, and it allowed them to separate themselves from both they did actions. There was Schilling spent a ton of money and sent a ton of like very tawdry smears against Biden, saying that he was endorsing sex changes on 8-year-olds. But it was a limited role. The campaign didn't really embrace him. But this allowed them to really be sort of have their hands clean from that disaster of losing that race, losing the Senate and the House and January 6th. So they get sort of a moment where there's this big power vacuum and they can come in as sort of outsiders with a vision for the party where they kind of affirm Trumpism in their own way. And what's concerning about this is that if you read what they wrote here, they constantly cited center-right or right-wing or liberal Democrats who were just bringing up transphobia as an issue they were losing on with no evidence. Like people like James Carville and David Shore, even elected officials like Abigail Spanberger, they used this as a shorthand, and they were constantly quoted by the groups like the APP to prove that this was somehow a losing issue for Democrats. And that was massively influential within the Republican Party in this period because they felt like they had no path forward. And that allows them to kind of create this modus operandi and a point of existence and a whole national program around this proven to fail strategy that is being propped up by these people who really don't know what the hell they're saying on the Democratic side and are just
they're going from gut. I mean, the big problem that I have with this, with the way that you hear the electoral argument around shying away from transphobia framed, is that there's no empirical data to back it up. It's just going from a general kind of ickiness that certain people who are more conservative Democrats feel when the issue is brought up, as opposed to the timeline that you lay out here. I'm at the end of your piece. You just go through it. I'm scrolling now. Tudor Dixon defeated Gretchen Whitmer. Tony Evers.
No, she was. It was the other way around.
Oh, sorry. Gretchen Whitmer defeated Tudor Dixon. My apologies. Evers defeated Michaels or however you said his last name.
Some random guy.
Right. Shapiro won in Pennsylvania against Mastriano. John Fetterman defeated Oz. Cortez Masto won in Nevada. Carrie Lake lost to Katie Hobbs. Mark Kelly defeated Blake Masters. Tim Walz defeated Jensen in Minnesota. Maggie Hassan defeated Bolduc, who was a very far-right Republican. Warnock defeated Walker.
He was the Bolduc was the commander of AFRICOM, which I always thought was very funny.
Yeah.
It was a bit of a step down from his previous work, going from commanding the U.S. Army and an entire continent to talking about litter boxes.
Yeah,
that was always a fun sideshow.
Right. He was one of the Republicans that the Democrats ran ads for in the primary process because he was
that worked. Everybody was hating on that, but it worked.
Oh, it worked. I advocated for it at the time. The Democrats absolutely should push the more extreme Republicans to the general election when they can, because to be honest, as you that's just politics. You want to make your opponent more marginal and associate them with things like January 6th and with things like transphobia. So I guess now we're in the modern era. Go ahead.
That is not an abstract thing. I think some people have calculated there are nearly 10 Senate seats Democrats have won since 2018 because of candidate quality. They control. They have the majority now because they have pushed these right-wing extremist people ahead of the moderate. They don't need much help. They are not moderate, nominated, obviously. But that strategy has been massively successful. If they tried to just have kind of a gentleman's agreement with the moderates and let them win their primaries, they would probably not hold the Senate right now, and they couldn't get any of the judges through.
Right. But so the overall point here is that that was a resounding defeat for transphobia. Mm-hmm. Resounding.
Yeah, historically terrible election, especially given the context. There's no precedent for it.
So, I mean, let's just talk about this then from the big picture now that we've laid all of this out here. There's a difference, I would say, between issues and how they poll, because in a vacuum you can ask somebody, hey, do you think that a trans girl should participate in this track meet or whatever? And you might not get the numbers that you want as somebody who wants to advocate for trans rights.
No.
But that doesn't mean that they're going to vote based on that response. And that's the disconnect.
That is something that is something that people who call themselves like popularists and say that they're all these electoral experts. This is like so basic that it baffles me every time. Issue polling matters, but what matters a lot more is issue salience. If people are going to actually vote on an issue when they go to the polls. And the question of like some like teenager competing in a sport that most people don't care about, like somebody who like most people like still I don't know if they even met a trans person. It's not an issue they have any personal investment in. That is not like considered relevant to their daily lives. So when Republicans talk about it all the time, it makes them look out of touch and like opportunistic. And the second thing is that this issue is very, very easily connected to a larger question of acceptance of LGBT people, which is a settled question. People are broadly very in favor of that. So you don't need to campaign on this when like Republicans try to bring up the boys and girls sports things, which may or may not poll well. You don't need to actually fight on that issue. You can just say, why do you hate gay people? Why do you hate LGBT people? I'm tolerant. I support everybody. You're a bigot. That works. People connect it to this larger question because they're not dumb enough to think that it's just like co-signed to this one issue. They see what the purpose of these like why these people are bringing it up. Like voters are generally kind of stupid, but they're not like completely like robotic, and they can make these connections and they can see what Republicans are trying to do here.
Yeah, and I would say too, the people that are going to be motivated to vote based on transphobia are already evangelical right-wingers who are voting for Republicans anyway.
Yeah, it doesn't expand the base.
Yeah.
And the thing is that it makes them look like religious lunatics to the secular northern swing voters who are crucial to any Republican national victory, who they've been doing terribly with since Dobbs. So it only like reinforces the ways in which those kinds of very influential like parts of the electorate already dislike Republicans.
Yes. And on the flip side, is there any evidence to show that activists on the left who are advocating for trans women in sports and trans rights to make sure that trans people have every opportunity to participate in the joys of life based on their gender identity, is there any evidence that that is affecting people at the voting booth in terms of turning them off from the left or the Democratic Party?
It's tough because Democrats have not made this a major part of their campaigns like Republicans have. And when they have, it's just been a larger question of, I'm the tolerant candidate, I support everybody, I love everyone. And that appeals to people. It's a major part of the Democratic appeal. You can very easily fold these specific issues into larger questions where the left holds a massive advantage. People kind of need to understand politics is more of a fluid sort of process than just an ideological war of one thing versus the other, like it's a YouTube debate channel. No offense to any YouTube debate channels.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've done debates on this show before, but I understand the limits of what that can provide. Well, it's mostly fun for us.
That's not how electoral politics is, and people kind of fail to make that distinction sometimes. I don't think you guys do, obviously.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. But I mean, I'm frustrated, though, by the vibes argument about transphobia and the fact that it's not backed up by any of the examples that you so thoughtfully write about in your piece. And what do you think really motivates that? Like, why do you have...
Yeah. Well, you can only come to two conclusions for it. It's people are either like closeted transphobes who are disingenuously pushing this argument because they have an agenda to hurt trans people, or they're too stupid and lazy to ever be taken seriously on anything. Because if you're a major public figure who writes about this stuff and is influential in the way that a lot of these people are, you aren't even doing the basic due diligence to see if like your gut feeling, which in a lot of cases is motivated just by these people being transphobic. Like Michael Bloomberg, when he was running for president, just said blatantly transphobic stuff when trying to say this was an electoral liability. You're not dealing with any of this seriously. It's just a level of laziness that is hard for me to even really comprehend. Like, you presumably care about winning, right? You should probably like look to see if what you're saying actually matches with what's happening. Like even like you can go down to the lowest possible level, totally remove any sense of morality, and they still fail even by their own standards, just out of sheer neglect.
Absolutely. Well, Josh, Ettingermentum, really appreciate your time today. Any last words before we let you go?
No, it's nothing in particular. This is just one thing. This is a free article in my newsletter. I have a lot of other stuff that I've written recently about electoral politics and history and American political history that you guys can check out. Like my latest piece is about speaker elections, like kind of going over why McCarthy lost that race and like kind of what comes next. That kind of goes like a lot of stuff about the failure kind of conservatism generally. But if you're interested in any of that, that's on my site. So it was good being on.
Yeah, Ettingermentum.news. People can go and subscribe there. We'll put a link to that in the description. Really appreciate your time today.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks so much.